No prisoner swap. In his most direct language yet, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau slammed the door on the possibility of releasing Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, who's currently under house arrest in her multi-million-dollar mansion in Vancouver, in exchange for the release of the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, the two Canadians who have spent almost 600 days in a Chinese jail in direct retaliation for Meng's arrest. Trudeau's rejection came after a group of 19 prominent Canadians, including ministers and leaders from all parties and diplomats, urged the Prime Minister to make a deal with China. Remember, under the Extradition Act, they argue, the Justice Minister does have the legal authority to intervene at any stage and end the extradition case. But the Prime Minister says it's not a matter of could, but should the minister intervene, and Trudeau says doing so would set a dangerous precedent and endanger the safety of Canadians abroad. It would reward, essentially, hostage diplomacy. Is the government right to take such a hard line, or should they be keeping their options open? What else can the government do to secure the release of the two Michaels? Joining me now is Vina Nadjibulla. She is Michael Kovrig's wife, though they are separated now. She's been fighting for his release for over 560 days. Vina, welcome to the program. I know it's a very difficult time, and I profoundly thank you for joining us. I can't imagine how difficult. What was your reaction when you heard the Prime Minister flatly reject the notion that he would intervene in exchange to get the two Michaels out?
Thank you for having me on the program, Evan. It has been a really difficult few days, and it's been a difficult 18 months, as you said, but we're very glad that we took the difficult step to come forward and to tell a little bit more of Michael's story and to invite the government, to push the government to move beyond there are no options to real considerations of options. So even though I'm disappointed that the Prime Minister said no to this particular solution and a proposal that imminent Canadians put forward, I am glad that we're finally having the conversation on what can be done and options that can be explored to resolve Michael's prolonged and painful detention.
Okay, let's talk about that. In your mind and in these 19 eminent Canadians' minds, the Justice Minister should intervene. What do you think should be done now, Vina? Should the Justice Minister intervene?
I think what's important before we get to that question is one thing that the Prime Minister talked about, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is that in securing Michael's freedom, we also need to make sure that this never happens again, that no Canadian finds themselves in this situation again. And believe me, having gone through this experience, I would never wish on any other Canadian family to experience what we have experienced for the last 565 days. But what I also believe is that we cannot ensure the protection of Canadians in the future at the cost of Michael's freedom today. I believe there are ways to make sure Canadians are more protected when they travel abroad in the future, and we can do that by learning important lessons from this experience, lessons that I don't think we learned from the Garrett's experience when the same thing happened to in their situation. Mm-hmm. I believe that we can put in place protocols, international protocols for dealing with hostage diplomacy, so that if and when this happens again, we don't have to spend months rallying international support, that there will be actually a system in place, a multilateral agreement or a platform where countries can come together and say this kind of behavior is not enough. So in other words, what I'm saying is we can do both. This isn't a question of we need to do everything we can to release Michael or we protect Canadians in the future. Both have to be on the table, and the government has a responsibility to do both.
But what is your response to the Prime Minister and others who say, if Canada at this moment decides, okay, we're going to release Meng Wanzhou in exchange for the two Michaels, China will see this as a reward for hostage diplomacy? And they say this is great. Anytime we have a dispute with Canada, we'll just do what they did to your husband and arrest them and throw them in a prison.
The situation is a lot more complex than that, Evan. China is very difficult to influence when it comes to their decision making. And history teaches us that what we do in the situation may or may not influence what they do in the future. Again, in the Garrett's case, which is the only historic precedent we have, although there have been other countries that have dealt with this, Canada did not acquiesce or give in, so to speak. And this has happened again, right? So, and furthermore, we have to note that this, while it's arbitrary, what China has done, it's an arbitrary detention. It is not random in a sense that they have reacted to something that happened here on December 1. So And there are questions on whether or not that extradition should have even gone ahead. And this week, I and others have invited a conversation to look at that. So although what China has done is unconscionable and should have never happened, it didn't happen in the vacuum. It's a lot more complex than we're just giving in to bullying. There's more to this story, and we have to look at the whole story.
Okay, now the Prime Minister has said to you, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to, the Justice Minister's not intervening. What other tools can Canada do right now to get your husband and Michael Spavor home?
That is the question of the day, Evan. And I hope that now that we have started a conversation on options and real solutions rather than just we can't and our hands are tied, I would like that to be the next thing that we focus our minds on. I know it's very easy for people to criticize, but one of the ways that I approach life is that when I feel something needs to be criticized, I do that by creating alternatives. So let's create alternatives. And that is a question I hope that the Prime Minister and others in government are seriously engaging with now. My only plea is that all options have to be considered, that at a time when Canada's leverage is limited, let's not close existing options because of a misunderstanding of our own rule of law system. And that became very clear this week, that our extradition environment, the rule of law environment and the extradition treaty allow for a much more hands-on approach for the Minister of Justice. And the fact that that took so long, Evan, to get really clear on, it's heartbreaking for me. And what I hope that we learn from this is that as we move forward, let's not preemptively close our own options and reduce our own leverage. Let's keep everything on the table. Let's be pragmatic. Absolutely, we have to be principled, but we also have to be pragmatic. There is no easy way out of this. There is no cost-free solution. We have to pay a price. The question becomes who pays the highest price. And at the moment, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor are paying that price. And I believe Canadians understand that that is fundamentally unjust and unfair. And if there's something we can do, we have to do it.
Vina, just before I let you go, we saw some letters that Michael has written you. I know they're all censored, but he does get a chance to write letters. Give us a sense of how he's coping with the charges and the new developments. What's his state? I think Canadians really would like to know how he's doing.
So the last letter that we got from him, Evan, was before he would have heard about the charges. So that was actually one of the most heartbreaking things for me last week, was imagining Michael receiving those news and processing that all alone. Having not seen a consular official since January, having not had any visits with a lawyer, that is heartbreaking. The letter that we did get, he wrote in the beginning of June, and it also expresses a deep sense of frustration with the even greater isolation that he was experiencing before. I mean, his confinement before the pandemic was already unimaginable. What has happened since the pandemic, with no consular visits, very sporadic letters. He only received one letter from us between January and the time that he wrote the June letter. It's been difficult. He's the kind of person that spent many, many years fully connected to everything that's happening in the world. In fact, that used to drive me crazy. His cell phone was attached to his hand. And now he's living in a situation that he knows nothing of what's happening. And the plea that he has for me and for others is to be relentless. He has been resilient. He has been incredible, but there is a limit to everything. And what really worries me is that the phase that we're in now, we have to do something. There is an urgency to his situation. I hope that became clear to Canadians this week. I am grateful for the support that we have received from around the country. And as we go into the July 1 holidays, as we all reflect on how grateful we are to live in a country that is peaceful, that is safe, I hope Canadians remember that there are 2 Canadians sitting in a jail in China, and all that they want is to come home. And I hope we will find a way to bring them home.
Vina Nadjibulla, powerful words. I want to thank you. Your advocacy is tireless, and the personal cost to you and your loved ones is incalculable as well. I really appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks so much as we think about you and your family.
Thank you so much, Evan.
All right.